Last time we spoke about the Battle of Luotian. Following a significant counteroffensive, the initial optimism waned as casualties escalated and morale plummeted for the Japanese. The strategically vital town of Luotian became a vital battleground, with the Chinese determined to defend it at all cost. Despite heroic efforts, including a daring night assault, the overwhelming Japanese forces employed superior tactics and artillery, steadily gaining ground. As September progressed, Japanese reinforcements flooded the front line, exacerbating the already dire situation for the Chinese. By late September, the fierce struggle to control Luotian culminated in a forced retreat by the Chinese forces, marking a significant turning point in the fight for Shanghai. Though they withdrew, the Chinese army earned some newfound respect, having showcased their tenacity against a formidable adversary. The battle became a testament to their resilience amidst overwhelming odds, setting the stage for a tumultuous conflict that lay ahead in the fight for their sovereignty. This episode is The Battle for Shanghai Part 5, Fighting Along the Wusong Creek. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube. You can help produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Pacific War and Eastern Front Week by Week podcast, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on all major podcast platforms. My latest episode over my YouTube channel seems to be going viral. It was me looking at how Japanese anime depicts the Pacific War. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/PacificWarChannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is about 28 episodes now and ongoing, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights to the subjects I will tackle next. And I guess I'll just give you a heads up. The latest episode is going to be on the USS Hornet CV-12, so that's actually the second one of the Pacific War. After that, there will be a poll, but amongst the options is going to be a full script on the Battle of Jutland. And yeah, you heard that one right. It's about 20,000 words long if I do it. It's going to be a hell of a show. So if that's of interest to you, please go check it out. The tides of warfare had shifted in Shanghai. In late September, the Japanese High Command dispatched 3 divisions to the Shanghai area, starting with the 101st Division landing on September the 22nd. This was followed by the 9th and 13th Divisions, bolstering Japan's military presence to 5 divisions within the city, despite the Chinese forces numbering over 25 divisions. However, the true dynamics of this confrontation revealed a more complex picture. While the Chinese boasted numerical superiority, the Japanese divisions, each comprising around 15,000 soldiers, were supported by nearly 90,000 troops, when including Marines and infantry. China's units, often as small as about, 5,000 men, made their effective deployment quite difficult. The Japanese forces also leveraged their advantages in materials, aircraft, and naval artillery, which could effectively target critical positions along the Chinese front. With these reinforcements in place, Japanese commanders, including Matsue, devised a bold strategy to execute a powerful thrust across the Wusong Creek and advance towards Suzhou Creek. The ultimate goal was to encircle and annihilate the main Chinese forces in a maneuver they had envisioned since their arrival in China. Ogishima Shizuo, a reservist of the 101st Division, had just been through his first night at the front. Within his trench, soldiers leapt from their slumber into a hail of bullets. Ogishima looked over the edge of his trench. It was dark, making it hard to discern what exactly was happening, but he thought he saw a flash of a helmet and a foxhole near the creek's edge. It certainly wasn't a Japanese helmet. Suddenly, it hit him that the gunfire wasn't a mistake. "It's the enemy! The enemy!" This is what he was yelling to his comrades. Others began to shout as well. "The enemy! They're behind us! Turn around!" Under the cover of darkness, a Chinese unit had managed to bypass the Japanese lines, and they launched an attack from the rear. The sound of aggressive gunfire erupted, and a Japanese heavy machine gun joined the fray. However, most of the bullets were fired haphazardly into the night. A force of about 50 Chinese were firing upon them. Japanese officers ordered the men to storm their positions, seeing Japanese infantrymen leap over their trenches into a hail of bullets. The Japanese and Chinese fired at each other and they tossed grenades when they got close enough. The Japanese jumped into the Chinese foxholes and then began stabbing them with swords or bayonet. Ogoshima thrust his bayonet into the belly of a Chinese soldier, marking his first kill. He felt no emotion. Within minutes, the little battle was all but over. Every Chinese soldier lay dead. It turned out it was a suicide mission for them. Ogoshima saw countless comrades die around him. It was a scene of absolute carnage. It was the morning of October the 7th. The 101st Division had just crossed the Wusong Creek from the north in the early hours of October the 6th. Specifically, only half of the division had made it across. The other half remained on the far side, unable to get their boats past the 300 feet of water protected by unseen Chinese machine guns and motor crews that would open fire at the slightest hint of any movement on the northern bank. Dozens of corpses floated in the murky water, serving as a grim reminder of the carnage from the previous 24 hours. Ogoshima, alongside tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers, were entering the most brutal part of the Shanghai campaign. Matsue's vision of a quick and decisive end to the Shanghai campaign would not come to be. Matsue detailed his plans in an order issued on September the 29th. The attack was to be conducted from west to east by the 9th, 3rd, and 101st Infantry Divisions. The 11th Division was assigned to follow the 9th, securing the right flank against potential Chinese counterattacks from the west. The 13th would serve as a reserve. The objective was to capture Dachang, an ancient town encircled by a medieval-style wall, and they would advance as quickly as possible to breach the Chinese lines north of the Suzhou Creek. Matsue had arranged an unusually high concentration of troops. The 3 divisions were aligned along a front that spanned only 3 miles. This meant that each division had less than half of the front length that the Japanese field manual typically recommended. The decision to compress the divisions into such a narrow front was partly to compensate for the artillery shortcomings that were still hindering the Japanese offensive. The Japanese confronted a formidable and well-prepared enemy. After extensive discussions, the Chinese commanders ultimately recognized that they had no choice but to shorten their front line. Defending Liuhang, a town situated along the route from Laojian to Dachang, had proven too costly, offering no real prospect of victory. Chen Jihang, the commander of the Chinese left wing, who often visited Liuhang and understood how dire the situation was. He repeatedly urged that the unwinnable battle be abandoned, and that the valuable troops be withdrawn to stronger positions. However, his pleas initially went unheeded. Chiang Kai-shek was primarily driven by the belief that the war was about securing territory, and he insisted on maintaining control over Liuhang at all costs. Meanwhile, the Chinese positions north of the Wusong Creek had been breached in numerous places during late September, and this caused Chiang Kai-shek to finally relent. A fighting retreat began on the night of October the 1st, and it would be completed by dawn of the 3rd. The new defensive line extended just over a mile west of the road from Laojian to Dachang, providing the Chinese defenders with excellent opportunities to harass the advancing Japanese army, with flanking fire for several miles as they moved south. At Wusong Creek, the Chinese line curved eastward and followed the southern bank for several miles. The creek provided a significant advantage to the Chinese defenders. Despite its name, it would be more accurate to describe it as a river. It reached widths of about 300 feet in some areas, and in several spots the southern bank formed a steep 6-foot wall. Anyone attempting to scale this barrier under intense mortar fire would be met at the top by rows of barbed wire and heavy machine gun fire. For a full mile south of the creek, the Chinese had spent weeks constructing a dense network of defenses, transforming farm buildings into formidable fortifications linked by deep trenches. They had learned valuable lessons from their German mentors, many veterans of the battles of the Somme and Verdun, and they applied these lessons effectively. The Japanese took Liuhang on the 3rd, and they were met with some counterattacks, but these were easily repelled. More confident, Matsue issued new orders on the 4th for the 3rd, 9th, and 101st Divisions to cross the Wusong Creek and advance a mile south. Beginning on the 5th, the 3 divisions crossed and carved out a narrow bridgehead under some heavy resistance. The Chinese were frantic now, as after the Wusong Creek, the last remaining natural obstacle was the Suzhou Creek. 2 miles west of the key road from Laojian to Dachang, Battalion Commander Yan Yingao of the 78th Division's 467th Regiment awaited the anticipated Japanese assault. The regiment had fortified 3 villages near a creek, reinforced with some sandbags, barbed wire, and clear fields of fire, along with some deep trenches for the troop movement. The 1st Battalion occupied the westernmost village, the 3rd Battalion held the other 2, while the 2nd Battalion remained in reserve. The initial Japanese attack began with some heavy artillery. Despite facing significant casualties, their infantry were forced to withdraw from all three villages. They returned later in the afternoon with even fiercer artillery assaults. The 1st Battalion suffered devastating losses, including its commander, leading to the loss of the village to the Japanese. Yan Yingao, observing from the rear, dispatched a reinforcement company, but it was quickly annihilated within just 10 minutes. Simultaneously, the Chinese 3rd Battalion at Tangbeijai was nearly encircled. Yan received orders from his regiment to advance over to relieve them, but just as they did, a Japanese column of 60 soldiers approached from the opposite direction. A battle ensued over the smoking rubble of the bombed-out village. The few survivors of the 3rd Battalion made a last stand, allowing the 2nd Battalion to fight its way in and take up their positions. It was a small and temporary victory. Chinese units arriving to the Shanghai theater were being literally tossed to the front lines, such as the Tax Police Division. Despite its name, they were a fully equipped military formation and quite well trained, consisting of 6 regiments, roughly about 25,000 armed men. Their officers had previously served under the young marshal, Zhang Shuliang. They were rushed to Tangchaojian, lying on the road from Laojian to Nanchang, bridged by the Wusong Creek. The bridge was crucial to the entire operation, as holding it would enhance the Chinese chances of delaying the Japanese advance. The tax police station at the northern end of the bridge became surrounded on 3 sides. Intense fighting ensued, occasionally escalating to hand-to-hand combat. By the 2nd day after the arrival, casualties had escalated significantly, forcing the tax police units to retreat south across the bridge, which ultimately fell to the advancing Japanese forces. A crisis atmosphere surrounded the meeting of the 3rd War Zone staff, chaired by Chiang Kai-shek, in Suzhou on October the 11th. Everyone agreed that the previous efforts to halt the Japanese advance south across the Wusong Creek had utterly failed. Each engagement resulted in Chinese troops being repelled without regaining significant territory. Chen Jihang proposed an attack in his sector, specifically targeting the area around Luojian. However, most felt that such an operation would not effectively influence the Japanese advance at Wusong Creek and ultimately dismissed the suggestion. Bai Jiangqi, whom at this point held an informal advisory role, called for simultaneous attacks along both banks of the Wusong Creek, thrusting into the right flank of the advancing Japanese. This would require an enormous amount of troops if there was to be any level of success. Bai Jiangqi was pushing to take 4 divisions from Guangxi, already in transit, to Shanghai for the task. Chiang Kai-shek liked the idea of a single decisive blow, and he agreed to Bai's idea. The German advisors were not so keen on this one. In fact, the Germans were getting pretty depressed over a growing and concerning issue. It seemed to them the Chinese staff simply talked too much, taking far too long to produce any decisions. There was a lot of reasons for this. A lot of these figures held way too many positions. Take, for example, Gu Zhutong, Chiang Kai-shek's deputy in Suzhou. He was the chief of staff, and he also held 2 advisory roles. Then there were these informal generals, such as Bai Jiangqi. A man such as Bai had no formal command here, yet he was providing views on operational issues. To the Germans, who had held clear military hierarchies as the literal Bible, it looked chaotic. But there was notable hope. The Germans acknowledged the Chinese were improving their artillery situation. For the first time since the battle for Shanghai began, 6 artillery battalions were moved into positions in the vicinity of Nanxiang, under the unified command of the headmaster of the Tangshan Artillery School near Nanjing. From there, they could coordinate barrages in the area south of Wusong Creek. Sun Liren got off at Nanxiang Railway Station October the 7th. He was 36 years old, and he was leading one of China's best units, the 4th Regiment of the Tax Police. Within all of the confusion, he was assigned to the 88th Division, who were fighting the heaviest battles in the campaign. By noon of the next day, nearly all of Sun Liren's regiment were cannibalized, sent as reinforcements to the 88th front. Afterwards, all was left was Sun and a group of 20 orderlies and clerks. At 2 p.m., he got a call from the division. They needed more reinforcements at the front, or else a small bridge north of Jiaibei would be taken, collapsing their lines. Sun awkwardly replied that he had no troops left, only to be told, "It's an order. If you disobey, you'll be court-martialed." Without any choice, Sun hastily organized dozens of soldiers, and he marched them to the bridge. As they arrived, his men saw Chinese troops withdrawing from said bridge. He asked one man what was going on. "The officers have all left. We also don't want to die here." To this, Sun said that he was an officer and he would stay and fight with them. The Japanese in pursuit were shocked to see the Chinese troops turn around and engage them. In general, the Japanese were surprised by the sudden resilience of the Chinese around the Wusong Creek. Many assaults were being beaten back. In the Jiabai district, much more urbanized, foreigners were watching in awe. One war correspondent had this to say: "Every street was a defensive line, and every house a pocket fort. Thousands of holes had been knocked through walls, linking the labyrinth of lanes into a vast system of defense in depth. Every intersection had been made into a miniature fortress of steel and concrete. Even the stubs of bomb-battered walls had been slotted at ground level for machine gun and rifles. No wonder the Japanese army was months behind in its boasts." East of the Hongpu River at Pudong, Sun Changzhi commanded an artillery regiment whom began launching a barrage across the river upon the Gongda airfield that had been allowing the Japanese air forces to support their infantry. Meanwhile, Chinese soldiers rolled a battery of 8 Bofor guns 300 yards from the riverbank, and at dawn they began firing upon any aircraft that tried to take off. They reported downing 4 Japanese aircraft and damaging another 7. By mid-October, the 88th Division took advantage of the lull in the fighting and prepared an ambitious attack aimed at cutting off the Sichuan North Road, which the Japanese were using as a supply line from the docks to their units north of the city. The German advisors developed this attack using Stoßtruppen tactics taken from World War I. Translated in English for stormtroopers, the main means of weakening the enemy lines was via infiltration rather than a massive frontal attack. The attack was unleashed on the 18th after bombardment by artillery and mortars as lightly armed Chinese soldiers stormed down the streets near the North Railway Station, and they took the Japanese there by complete surprise. They quickly occupied a segment of the Sichuan North Road, cutting the Japanese supply chain for many days. Now, back on the 13th, Kuze Hixiao led a company of the Japanese 9th Division to perform an attack on Chen Jihang, located due north of the Wusong Creek. It was a strategic and heavily fortified stronghold that obstructed the southward advance. As Kuze's men reached its vicinity, they stopped to rest with orders to begin their assault at 1 p.m. The Japanese artillery kicked off the fight, and it was soon met with much larger Chinese artillery. This was an unpleasant surprise for the Japanese, whom up to this point had always had superiority in artillery. Regardless, the assault went ahead, seeing wave upon wave of attackers fighting through cotton fields and bullets. Kuze's men were forced to crawl through the field. Kuze himself crawled his way to a small creek to discover with absolute horror it was full of Japanese and Chinese corpses at various stages of decomposition. The assault on Chen Jihang bogged down quite quickly. Kuze and his men spent a night amongst the rotting dead. The following day, orders arrived from 2 neighboring units to renew the assault as Kuze fell back into the reserve. The day's attempt fared no better, simply piling more bodies upon the fields and waterways. The next day, Kuze watched Japanese flamethrower units enter the fray as they led an attack over the creek. Men jumped into waist-deep water, waded across to fight up the slopes through mazes of Chinese trenches. Then, to their surprise, they stormed and occupied and unoccupied Chen Jihang without even firing a shot. Then Kuze and his men suddenly saw a grenade coming flying right at them. Kuze was injured and he was taken out by some comrades to the rear. Chen Jihang had been bitterly fought over for weeks. Alongside Yanghang, it was considered 2 key points necessary for the Japanese to be able to advance against Dachang further south. Meanwhile, Sichuanese troops were being pulled back for the fresh 4 Guangxi divisions to come in. They wore lighter brown uniforms with British-style tin hat helmets. One of their divisions, the 173rd, was sent straight to Chen Jihang, arriving before dawn of the 16th. While the handover of the positions was taking place, the Japanese launched an intense aerial and artillery bombardment, causing significant casualties before the 173rd could even deploy. Later that day, one of their regiments engaged the Japanese and they were slaughtered on the spot. 2/3 of their men became casualties. The battle raged for 4 days as the 3 other Guangxi divisions moved to the front. There was no break on either side. As one Guangxi officer recalled, "I had heard the expression storm of steel before, but never really understood what it meant. Now I do." By mid-October, Matsue's optimism about his southern push was waning. Heavy rain over the past week had slowed his men down considerably. Supplies were taking much longer to reach the front. Intelligence indicated the senior Chinese commanders had moved from Suzhou to Nanxiang, with some in Shanghai proper. To Matsue, this meant that they were nowhere near close to abandoning Shanghai. That day, Matsue wrote in his diary, "It's obvious that earlier views that the Chinese front was shaken have been premature. Now is definitely not the time to rashly put the offensive." During this rainy time, both sides received some rest as a no-man's land formed. Winter uniforms were actually arriving for the Japanese 3rd and 11th Divisions, causing them some encouragement. The 3rd Division had already taken 6,000 casualties, but they had received 6,500 reinforcements. Matsue estimated their combat strength to be only 1/6 of its original level. On the 19th, Matsue received reports that soldiers from Guangxi were arriving in Shanghai and deploying around the Wusong Creek. To relieve some pressure, the Imperial Japanese Navy sent a mock invasion force up the Yangtze to perform a 3-day diversionary mission. Around 8 destroyers and 20 transport vessels anchored 10 miles upriver from Chuanchakou. They bombarded the area to make it seem like there was an amphibious invasion that was going to occur there. Meanwhile, both nations were fighting a war of propaganda. On October the 14th, China filed a complaint at the League of Nations accusing Japan of using poison gas in Shanghai. To this, the Japanese simply accused them of using gas, specifically mentioning at the Battle of Chen Jihang. Early in the campaign, they accused the Chinese of using sneezing gas, a chemical adopted during World War I. To this accusation, Shanghai's mayor, Yu Hongjun, stated to reporters, "The Japanese sneeze because they've got cold feet." Now back to our friend Ogoshima, with the 101st. His unit crossed the Wusong Creek early on. Afterwards, the fighting became quite confused, as the Chinese and Japanese started across 150 yards of no man's land. Every now and then, the Japanese would leap out of the trenches and they would charge into the Chinese lines, but the attacks would all end the same way. Rows of the dead were cut down by machine guns. It was exactly like the Western Front of World War I, and the German advisors clearly saw this. The incessant rain kept the trenches drenched like knee-deep bogs. Officers who had read about the Western Front routinely had their men line up in the mornings for health checks. Anyone trying to fake a disease risked being branded a deserter, and deserters were shot. As Ogoshima recalled, "The soldiers in the front lines only have one thought on their minds. They want to escape to the rear. Everyone envies those who, with light injuries, are evacuated. The ones who unexpectedly get a ticket back in this way find it hard to conceal their joy. As for those left in the front line, they have no idea if their death warrant has already been signed and how much longer they have to live." The Haratatian, with the 9th Division, experienced pure hell fighting entrenched Chinese, firing through holes in walls of abandoned farm buildings. Japanese officers urged their men to charge over open fields. Out of 200 men that he fought with, 10 were able to fight after the battle. As Nohata recalled, "All of my friends died there. You can't begin to describe the wretchedness and the misery of war." Watanabe Wushichi, an officer in the 9th Division, was given orders to secure water supplies for the frontline troops. It was a task that seemed simple enough, given the sheer amount of creeks and ponds in the area. However, they were filled with corpses now. For many troops dying of thirst, it became so unbearable when anyone came across an unpolluted well, they would crowd around it like zombies, turning it into a mud pool. Officers were forced to post guards at every discovered water source. Watanabe was shocked by the Chinese fierceness in battle. At one point, he was attacking some pillboxes, and upon inspecting the captured ones, he was horrified to see how many Chinese bodies lay dead inside, still clutching the rifles. Meanwhile, international outcry mounted over the invasion. On October the 5th, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt made a speech in Chicago calling for more concrete steps to be taken against the Japanese. "It would seem to be unfortunately true that the epidemic of world lawlessness is spreading. When an epidemic of physical disease starts to spread, the community approves and joins in a quarantine of the patients in order to protect the community against the spread of the disease." Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek pushed the international community to sanction Japan and deprive her of oil, iron, and steel, all materials needed for waging her illegal war. The League of Nations proved completely inept. On October the 21st, Japanese Foreign Minister Hiroto Koki approached the German ambassador in Tokyo, Herbert von Dirksen, asking if China was willing to negotiate. Germany declared that she was willing to act as a mediator, and to this, Japan sent some demands. Japan sought for some more Chinese concessions in North China and a demilitarized zone around Shanghai. Germany's ambassador to Nanjing, Oskar Trautmann, conveyed this to Chiang Kai-shek. Instead of replying, Chiang Kai-shek asked the German what he thought. Trautmann said he considered the demands a basis for further talks, and he gave the example of what happened to Germany at the negotiating table during World War I. To this, Chiang Kai-shek scoffed, and he made it clear he intended to restore the situation to the pre-hostile lines before any talks were made. Now back at the front, Bei Changxi planned his counterattack into the right flank of the Japanese. The attack was set for the 21st. The Guangxi troops at Chen Jihang were extricated and they were sent to assembly points. Matsui wrote in his diary on the 23rd, "The enemy will launch a counterattack along the entire front tonight. It seems the planned attack is mainly targeted at the area south of the Wusong Creek. It will give us an opportunity to catch the enemy outside of his prepared defenses and kill him there." At 7 p.m., the Chinese artillery began. An hour later, troops were advancing east. The left wing of the Chinese attack, led by the 176th Guangxi Division, north of Wusong Creek, initially advanced quite swiftly. However, it soon encountered significant obstacles, including numerous creeks and canals that disrupted progress. Concerned about the supply trains lagging behind, the vanguard decided to relinquish much of the ground it had gained as dawn approached, hoping to reclaim it later that night. Meanwhile, the 174th Guangxi Division's assault south of Wusong Creek also struggled. It met unexpectedly strong resistance and had difficulty crossing the canals due to insufficient bridge-building materials. Fearing artillery and aerial attacks before dawn, this division retreated to its starting line, abandoning the hard-won territory from the previous night. Both divisions then dug in, preparing to withstand a counterattack during the daylight hours, when the Japanese forces could fully leverage their air superiority. As anticipated, the counterattack occurred after sunrise on October the 22nd. In the 176th Division sector, Japanese forces surrounded an entire battalion by noon, resulting in its complete destruction, including the battalion commander. The main success for the day came from a Guangxi unit that had, despite facing an attack from the Japanese infantry, supported by 5 tanks, managed to hold its ground. Initially on the verge of collapse, they organized a rapid defense that repelled the Japanese assault. 1 tank was destroyed, 2 became stuck in the canal, and 2 others retreated, highlighting the challenges of tank warfare in riverine terrain around Shanghai. An after-action report from the Guangxi troops read like this: "The Japanese enemy's army and air force employed every kind of weapon, from artillery to tanks to poison gas. It hit the Chinese front like a hurricane and resulted in the most horrific losses yet for any army group since it had entered the battle." As the sun rose on the 23rd, Japanese airplanes took to the skies. At about 9 a.m., they targeted the already battered 174th Guangxi Division south of Wusong Creek. A Guangxi general who survived the assault recounted the devastation. "The troops were either blown to pieces or buried in their dugouts. The 174th disintegrated into a state of chaos." Other units suffered similarly catastrophic losses. By the end of the 23rd, the Chinese operation had incurred heavy casualties, including 2 brigade commanders, 6 regimental commanders, and around 2,000 soldiers, with 3 out of every 5 troops in the first wave killed or injured. Consequently, the assault had been called off. Bei Changxi's counterattack was a complete and utter disaster. Many Guangxi veterans of this battle would hold grudges for years for what they saw as a senseless and hopeless battle. Meanwhile, in Jiabei, Zhang Boqing, a 27-year-old and the chief of staff of the 80th Division, came to the headquarters of General Gu Zhutong, urging him to move to a safer location, only to be told this: "Chiang Kai-shek wants your division to stay in Jiabei and fight. Every company, every platoon, every squad is to defend key buildings in the city area and villages in the suburbs. You must fight for every inch of land and make the enemy pay a high price. You should launch guerrilla warfare to win time and gain sympathy amongst our friends abroad." The command had more to do with diplomacy than battlefield sense. The Nine Powers Conference was set for Brussels the following week, and it was important China kept a spectacle going on in front of all the foreigners in Shanghai. If the war advanced into lesser-known hamlets in the countryside, there would be no talk amongst the great powers. So, to this explanation, Zhang Boqing replied, "Outside of the streets of Jiabei, the suburbs consist of flat land with little opportunity for cover. It's not suitable for guerrilla warfare. The idea of defending small key points is very difficult. The 88th Division has so far had reinforcements and replacements 6 times, and the original core of officers and soldiers now make up just 20 to 30%. It's like a cup of tea. If you just keep adding water, it becomes thinner and thinner. Some of the new soldiers we receive have never even been in battle, never even fired a shot. At this moment, we rely on the backbone of the old soldiers to train them while fighting. As long as the command system is in place, we can use the old hands to provide leadership. We'll be able to maintain the division as a fighting force. But if we divide up the units, the coherence will all be lost. Letting every unit fight on its own will just add to the trouble. Zhang Boting then rushed east to the 88th Divisional HQ inside the Xinhang warehouse, laying just across the international settlement. Here, a final stand would be made, and whose participants would become known as 800 Heroes. But that's going to be for a later podcast, and it's going to be a hell of a story. In the meantime, if you actually want to know about this story, you can go over to Kings and Generals YouTube channel and look up the Battle of the Xinhang Warehouse. It was me who wrote it. Zhang Boting had returned to his HQ on October the 26th. By then, the Shanghai situation had deteriorated dramatically. The stalemate around the Wusong Creek had suddenly collapsed. The IJA 9th Division broke the Guangxi forces, and now Matsue planned for a major drive south against Dachang. Before he even had time to meet his colleagues, the 3rd and 9th Divisions reached Zhaomaidan Creek, which ran west to east 2 miles south of Wusong Creek. In preparation for the continued advance, the Japanese began dropping leaflets over the Chinese positions. The leaflets read that they were offering each soldier about 5 Chinese yuan to put down their arms. That was roughly half a US dollar each at the time. This did not meet much results, as the Chinese knew the Japanese rarely took prisoners. Instead, the Guangxi troops continued to retreat after a brutal week of combat. Most of them were moving to prepared positions north and south of Suzhou Creek, the last remaining natural obstacle to stop the Japanese conquest of Shanghai. In the early hours of the 25th, the Japanese gradually realized that the Chinese were withdrawing. The Japanese unleashed hundreds of aircraft and employed creeping barrages with their artillery. This may have been the first instance they employed such World War I tactics during the campaign. The barrage was kept 700 yards in front of the advancing Japanese forces, giving the Chinese ample time to emerge from cover and remap positions they abandoned under artillery fire. Despite a general withdrawal, the Chinese also mounted a strong defense around Dachang. 2 strategic bridges across Zhaomaidan Creek, located west of Dachang, were defended by 1 division each. The 33rd Division, a recent arrival in Shanghai, was tasked with securing the westernmost bridge, known as the Old Man Bridge, while the 18th Division, who had just arrived as well, was stationed near Little Stone Bridge, closer to Dachang. However, neither division was capable of stopping the advancing Japanese forces. On October the 25th, a Japanese column, led by more than 20 tanks, overwhelmed the 33rd Division's defenses and captured the Old Man Bridge. As the Chinese division attempted a fighting retreat towards Dachang, it suffered severe casualties due to superior Japanese firepower. By mid-afternoon, only 1 in 10 of its officers and soldiers remained fit for combat, and even the divisional commander had been wounded. The Japanese force then advanced to Little Stone Bridge, and after intense fighting with the 18th Division that lasted until sunset, they captured the bridge as well. Meanwhile, the 18th Division fell back to Dachang, where their commander, Zhu Zhouhua, received a blunt order from Gu Zhoutang to hold Dachang at all costs, warning that disobedience would lead to a court-martial. Concerned that losing Little Stone Bridge might already jeopardize his position, Zhu Yaohua quickly organized a nighttime counterattack to try and reclaim it. However, the Japanese had anticipated this move, and they fortified their defenses near the bridge, leading to a disastrous failure for the Chinese. On October the 26th, the Japanese unleashed all available resources in an all-out assault on Dachang. The town had been nearly reduced to rubble, with only the ancient wall remaining as evidence of its former population. Up to 400 airplanes, including heavy bombers, targeted the Chinese troops in and around Dachang, causing significant casualties amongst both soldiers and pack animals. A Western correspondent watching from afar described it as the fiercest battle ever waged in Asia up to that time. A tempest of steel unleashed by Japanese aircraft, which flew leisurely overhead while observation balloons guided them to their targets. The curtains of fire never lifted for a moment from the Chinese trenches. Following the aerial assault, more than 40 Japanese tanks emerged west of Dachang. The Chinese forces found themselves defenseless against this formidable armored column, as they had already relocated their artillery to safer positions behind the front lines. Left to fend for themselves, the Chinese infantry was quickly overwhelmed by the advancing wall of enemy tanks. The defending divisions, including Zhu Yaohuai's 18th Division, stood no chance against such material superiority, and they were swiftly crushed. After a brief skirmish, the victorious Japanese forces marched in to claim Dachang, which had become a sea of flames. Matsue observed this scene with deep satisfaction as the rising sun banner flew over the smoldering ruins of the town. After a month of bitter fighting, today we have finally seen the payoff. In stark contrast, Zhu Yaohuai faced immediate criticism from his superiors and peers, many whom believed he could have done much more to resist the Japanese onslaught. The weight of this humiliation became unbearable for him. Just 2 days after his defeat at Dachang, he shot himself in the chest and ended his life. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Pacific War and Eastern Front week-by-week podcasts, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Please, if you check it out, say where you came from. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/PacificWarChannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. In late September, the battle for Shanghai intensified as Japanese forces surged with reinforcements pressing against Chinese defenses in Laodian. Amidst the chaos, Japanese soldiers like Okushima fought bravely in the trenches, witnessing unimaginable carnage. As October began, the battle's brutality escalated, with waves of attacks resulting in devastation and casualties for both sides. However, the Chinese forces showcased remarkable resilience, adapting their strategies and trying to fortify defenses, marking a significant chapter in the struggle for their sovereignty against overwhelming odds.